Hello everyone, my name is Melissa Bishop. I am a graduate student at Morningside College. I am also a second grade teacher in a general education classroom in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Today I'm going to be telling you about my research study. The title of my research study is Effects of Teaching Sight Words by Phonemic Patterns on Sight Word Automaticity. A problem I have found is that many students I have encountered are not proficient readers. When looking at data, I discovered that 36% of fourth grade students in the United States were reading at or above grade level in 2015. Similarly, 38% of fourth grade students in Iowa were reading at or above grade level in 2015. When taking a closer look at my class's data, I found that 52% of students in my class were not proficient in the area of reading. That means they were unable to read second grade text accurately or with fluency. Students in my classroom were also not fluent in reading second grade sight words. In order to become more proficient readers, students need to be able to decode words. They also need to be given opportunities to learn how to do that and strategies to do that. They need to be more accurate when they are reading, and they also need to become more fluent with their sight words. My study is going to be focusing on that third bullet point, the fluent with sight words. I want them to look at a sight word and be able to read it with automaticity. So why me? Why am I doing this? A lot of research has been done and a lot of work has been done with word study in my school, and we have been using the 95% group curriculum. This teaches us why words are said certain ways and why words are spelled certain ways. One way we are teaching students about word study is through orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping is when you listen for sounds within a word, and then you determine a letter or letter to go with each sound, and then you can write that word out. It helps you be able to write and to read these words. I want my students to be able to identify phonemic patterns within words. By orthographically mapping, they can start to identify those phonemic patterns, and then they can apply those patterns to words that they don't know how to read or may not know how to spell. Now I'm going to be getting into the literature review part of my research. I did some research on sight word instruction, phonics instruction, and spelling instruction specifically because my research focuses on all three of those. The first research study I'd like to tell you about focuses on sight word instruction as well as phonics instruction for students who have dyslexia. In this research, the students were placed into three groups. The first group received 8 weeks of sight word instruction followed by 8 weeks of phonics instruction. The second group was given 8 weeks of phonics followed by 8 weeks of sight word. And the third group was exposed to sight word and phonics instruction for the entire 16 weeks of the research study. At the end of the first 8 weeks, all three groups showed significant gains in their ability to read sight words. But after 16 weeks, the students who had phonics instruction first scored better on sight words than the other two groups. So they had that base of phonics before they started learning their sight words. Another research study that I read about was done by Mayfield and Holmes in 1999, and it focused on sight word instruction for high-risk students. These students were split into two groups, the control group and the experimental group. The control group was exposed to only core curriculum. So they learned 6 to 8 vocabulary words a week, and then they had a comprehension component. The experimental group had that core instruction, so the vocabulary and the comprehension, but they added a component of sight words. So students got a sight word list of many words that they did not know, and they practiced those sight words throughout the weeks. At the end of this study, the students who had the sight word component added in showed a significant difference in score. P was less than 0.05. They also scored higher on their cumulative reading assessments. A final research study that I would like to share with you today focused on spelling patterns, and this was done in 2002. Students were split into a control and an experimental group. The control group received spelling instruction based on spelling patterns. So students were given a list, and embedded within that list were words with similar patterns. Students had to identify those patterns and then sort the words based on those patterns. This is similar to Words Their Way. The experimental group had that same spelling instruction, but then they had the additional added mini lesson of phonics instruction each day. They might have received phonics instruction on short vowel sounds or blends or digraphs or other phonics skills. At the end of this research, the experimental group showed significant gains in their ability to spell, P equals 0.02. They improved their sentence writing and became more fluent when identifying letter sound patterns. This research that I did really focused a lot on students who had disabilities, students who were considered at risk, or some of that data was even outdated and really, really old. So what I want to do in my research is focus on that general education classroom, and then I want to find a way to embed phonics into teaching sight words to help students be able to read and spell those sight words. The purpose of my research was to determine the effectiveness of introducing sight words based on phonemic patterns within words, and then students' abilities to retain the reading of those sight words as well as the spelling of those sight words. My hypothesis is that students who receive sight word instruction with similar phonemic patterns will have more success in reading and spelling second grade sight words than students whose instruction of sight words was in a random order. The independent variable for my research is sight word instruction. The experimental group will be given a spelling list of sight words that have similar phonemic patterns embedded within. The control group will get a list of sight words for their spelling that will be completely random lists. There will be no phonemic patterns embedded. The dependent variable is the reading and spelling of second grade sight words. The participants in this research study consisted of all second grade students in the researcher's school. The control group had 21 students, 10 of them were boys, 11 girls. One student had an IEP in the areas of reading and math. Similar to the control group, the experimental group had 21 students, 9 boys and 12 girls, and 2 students in this class had IEPs in the area of speech. The materials that I needed for this research included a list of second grade sight words. We have 125 second grade sight words, but I narrowed them down to 48 for this research study because this research study was done in 6 weeks, so 8 sight words for each week. The experimental and control group both used the 95% curriculum throughout this study. They used the curriculum to be able to listen for sounds within words and then assign sounds to go with, or assign letters to go with each sound so they could spell the words. The experimental group also used parts of Words Their Way within their this research study. Their spelling list had spelling patterns within it. They had to identify those spelling patterns and then sort the spelling patterns based on the phonemic patterns. Each second grade student was given a pretest consisting of 48 second grade sight words. Students were asked to read each of the 48 sight words and then spell the 48 sight words. This was used as a baseline. So every day, students had a different job dealing with spelling and sight word instruction. So on Thursday, the control group and the experimental group got their new lists for the week. Those lists also went home to families on Thursday. On Friday, as a whole class, they orthographically mapped each and every word. In addition to that, the experimental group also identified the patterns within their spelling list and then sorted the words based on those phonemic patterns. They did this as a whole class on Friday. On Monday, the class focused on 4 of the 8 sight words. They did movement activities, including writing the words in the air, writing the words on the floor, clapping out words, to name a few. They also focused on those 4 words during their differentiated reading groups. The experimental group also had an opportunity to sort their words based on the phonemic patterns. On Tuesday, they did the same routine with the other 4 remaining words. So they did the movement activities, focused on those 4 words during differentiated reading groups, and the experimental group had an opportunity to sort their words based on their patterns. On Wednesday, the experimental group again did a word sort, and then each group had an opportunity to read and spell their words independently and for about 5 minutes on that day. On Thursday, the whole group would review the spelling words, and then they would be given the post-test on Thursday. The pre-test for the next week would also be given, and those new lists would go home. Along with all of that instruction, students had opportunities to practice their spelling words during daily 5 rotations. Word study is an important component of daily 5. During their word study rotation, students could get Chromebooks and go to spellingcity.com to review their spelling words, or they could use their tic-tac-toe board to choose different activities that were exciting for them. It provides a lot of choice for students to practice their words. So each week, I was able to monitor progress of how they're doing on their sight words. I gave them a spelling test of the 8 words, and I could see what words were highly missed and what words they were very, very solid on. Highly missed words were reviewed throughout the research study to give them more exposures to those more challenging words. Data was analyzed after the 6-week study had ended, and I compared the post-test to that baseline of the pre-test. The results did not show a statistically significant impact for reading and spelling sight words, specifically with the students who got that phonemic practice. The researcher accepts the null hypothesis. Based on the dependent sample t-test for the reading of sight words, the p-score was not less than 0.05. The p-score was on the pretest was 0.558, and the post-test was 0.225, which does not show a statistically significant impact. And when you look at the spelling of the sight words, the dependent sample t-test did not show a statistically significant impact. The p-score for the pretest was 0.87, and the p-score for the post-test was 0.118, which is not statistically significant. However, it is moderately significant. When looking at the data and the mean scores and standard deviation when reading sight words, the experimental group and control group both showed great gains. The mean score went from 62.33 for the experimental group in the pretest to the post-test, which was 96%. Their standard deviation went from 11.35 to 11.53. The mean scores for the control group started at 68.52 for the pretest and went to 87.05 in the post-test, standard deviation going from 38.98 to 31.38. When looking closer at spelling of the second grade sight words, the mean and standard deviation was helpful to look at. The mean scores for the experimental group for the pretest was 50.05%, and that bumped up to 76.80 in just a 6-week study. And the pretest score for the mean score for the control group was 48.67 and ended at 63.33. The standard deviation for the experimental group went from 28.69 to 24.56, and the control group standard deviation was 26.73 to 29.03. I learned a lot from this research study. I learned that similarly to Aries finding in 2005, phonics instruction supports reading of sight words. I also learned that students listen to sounds and then they can use those sounds to apply that to spelling. And that aligns nicely with Squires and Walter's findings as well as White's findings.